Okay, in this video we're going to go over dynamic and static typing and also weak versus strong typing. So I'm going to start by giving a small definition of each. So dynamic typing is basically when the type of a variable is defined during runtime, and this means that the type can change, usually, unless it was defined differently by the creators of the language, but there's no reason for it not to be able to change. In static, the type is defined during compile time, and it does not change throughout the program's uh, run time. Um, and basically, the type for a static variable is defined in the declaration in the program, and the type for a dynamic type, it's defined by the type of the variable of the data being assigned to it. And then, okay, and moving on to strong versus weak typing. So, strong typing basically means that uh, the program isn't going to allow you to do anything that you wouldn't think you'd be able to do. Basically, like adding a string and a number. It won't allow you to do something like that. If you have an if statement, it's not going to allow you to put anything in there other than a true or false or something that returns a true or false variable. In a weakly typed language, it's going to try to make sense of any statement you write. If you put in that you want to add a string and a number, it's going to assume that you're not making a mistake. That's what you want done. It's going to try to convert them to equal ground and add them or concatenate them somehow. If you have an if statement, it's going to try to find convert what you have in there to a Boolean type. Okay, moving on to some examples. This first program is C#, which for the most part is quite strongly typed. So up here I have my string, and I write that to the console. So it's just 3. And the strong typing is going to come in when I define this integer down here, and when I add them here, it's not going to work. It's not going to let me add a string onto an integer. And then it also is strongly typed in this aspect. If I have an integer in an if statement, it's not going to try to convert this integer into a bool, whereas some languages will, and they'll take any value that isn't 0 as true, and any value that is, and if it is 0, it'll be false. Now, an example of weak typing in C# is down here, where C# will let you add an integer onto a string because it assumes that you want to concatenate this integer onto this string. And I'll show you down here in the command line, and we'll get 330, is it's going to convert that integer to a string and concatenate my int onto the my string, which is just 3. So there we get my original my string, and here's my string plus my int. And C# is statically typed. You can see up here, and here I declare the type when I write out the declaration of the variable, and this cannot change throughout the program's running and this cannot change throughout the program's running time. So that means it's statically typed, and it sets the type during compilation. Then we can go into a programming language such as Python, and this language is dynamically typed, but it is also strongly typed. In fact, it is stronger more strongly typed than C sharp. Up here, I have an example of the dynamic typing. I define a string, and then I put this equal to 3, and it converts it to an integer type from a string type. And then I have down here another variable, and I have an example showing that it is strongly typed. And I will go ahead and run this just to prove it, and see we have an error. We cannot add an int and a string. And then down here, I have an example showing it it does not work the other way around, like C sharp. You cannot concatenate an integer to a string. Now the third language I have to show you is both dynamic and weakly typed. So it will basically try to convert any variables like you have in additions or subtractions to an equal state and go through with the action. And it also changes types. Now the third language I have to show you is JavaScript, which is both dynamic and weakly typed. So this means it'll change types, and it will also basically try to convert any types you have in addition, subtractions, if statements to the variables they need to be and go through with the action. So I have a string here. I changed the string to an integer or a number. It's actually just called a number in JavaScript. And then I have another string, and I'll show you an example of it being of integer being added to a string, and then a string being added to an integer. In both cases in JavaScript, they're going to convert to strings, to that middle ground, and the one is going to be concatenated to the other. The reason that it always converts them both to strings is because there's obviously strings that aren't going to successfully convert to numbers and be able to go through with a mathematical operation. So here's an example of an integer being added to a string. I will save it and open it up in my browser. And as you can see, it prints out 443. And our integer and our string was 44, and our integer was 3. So it converted on both the strings and concatenated the integer onto the string. And then my second example here is me adding a string onto an integer, and it's going to do the same thing. It's going to except it's going to convert it's going to convert the integer into a string still, and it's going to concatenate the other thing onto the end. So in this one we should get 344. So I'll go ahead and save that. And as you see, we get 344. And also, if you just wanted to, if you wanted to see this, you can also just go if something like my var and it's going to convert that into a bool. Anything that isn't 0 into a bool that is true, and anything that is 0 as false. So we should get hello world in our console. There you go. So this video has been about strongly typed languages versus weak typed languages, and dynamic versus static. Thank you for watching. Remember to comment, rate, and subscribe if you're interested in music or podcasts. I have a producing tutorial channel and also a podcast channel, and also a channel where I post music that I make.